I tried to record this last night, but I couldn't get in the vibe or the zone or whatever, so it just didn't come out really well. And I kind of feel bad. But we already had an intro. So I already talked about John 1. I already talked a little about John 2, John 3, Nicodemus, Spirit, mission, purpose, and it goes into the relationship between the Father and the Son, which is really important. And then we have the cool stuff. We get into chapter 4. And chapter 4 of John is, oh, it's one of my favoriteest chapters in the ever. Um, so, Jesus and company leave the area around Jerusalem and the Jordan, and the reasons for it aren't entirely clear, possibly because of persecution, possibly because they don't want to be pulling people away from the disciples of John, possibly because Jesus just wants to go and do other things. Um, so they had to go through Samaria, and if you're familiar with the history of Samaria and Samaritans, as I'm sure you've been told over and over again, the Jews and the Samaritans, or the Samaritans, whichever one, really don't get along well. Um, so they're Jewish, kind of. So remember back to the Babylonian captivity, right? Um, when there were a lot of Jews that were taken out of Israel and into Babylon and into other places. Not all of them were taken, though. There were some that were left behind. So the Samaritans are the ones who were left behind. So the ones who were taken away were primarily the upper class people. So the Samaritans are the lower class, first off. Um, they are, in some cases, they intermarried with the people that the Babylonians brought into that. And so you've got this socioeconomic conflict. You have that these were the ones who went away to Babylon and got all the great, incredible Babylonian education because Babylon was like the center of the world and come back. And so the people who are already backwoodsy are like more backwoodsy, and they've intermarried, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So, rough things. Furthermore, the Samaritans believe that the holy mountain is Mount Gerizim, which is up in the north of Jerusalem, not the Mount Moriah. Well, they think that Mount Gerizim is Mount Moriah, but that's a separate issue. So, not the holy mountain where the Jewish temple stands. So, there's been infighting and things for 400 years or so. And in fact, I mean, you can go into Nehemiah and Ezra for more fun stuff about this. So, the biggest point of contention, besides the whole like arguments over doctrine and belief that things were changed in the Babylonian captivity, and the belief that these are like the impure because they intermarried and whatever. Big thing is it Gerizim or is it the Temple Mount in Israel? And that is really important. And here's why it's going to be important. Okay, so John 4. I love John 4. So they are in Samaria, and they and the Samaritans don't get along very well. But because they're really hungry and thirsty, the disciples go to buy food, and Jesus just sits by the well. And this well is a point of big contention among Samaritans and Jews, because this is the well that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, but now it's in the hands of the Samaritans, and yeah, not cool stuff. So, verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to give meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. She's kind of confused, because this is obviously some kind of Jewish person. I mean, I don't know how he dresses, whether he dresses as an itinerant carpenter or he dresses as an itinerant preacher. Regardless, he's kind of recognizable as a Jew. And then we get into living water. And whether this woman thinks that Jesus is just crazy, or she's not understanding, or where the translation makes things simpler, he says that he can offer her living water, and she says, Dude, you don't have a bucket. You just asked me for a drink. Where are you going to get this living water from? Um, Art thou greater? I love this in verse 12. Art thou greater than our father Jacob, who gavest us this well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? And then Jesus answered and said to her again, Whoso drinketh of the water, this water shall drink again, but whosoever drinketh the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but it shall be within him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman said unto him, Sir, give me of this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. I don't know if she's playing with him, if she believes him. It's really not clear. I could really see it going all kinds of ways. But one way or the other, she never seems to draw Jesus the water. He asks her a simple question, can you give me some water? And she starts this big long sociopolitical discourse. So Jesus says, go and get your husband and tell him to come here. Maybe he wasn't that exasperated. I don't know how exasperated he gets. Probably less exasperated than I do. The woman answers and says, I have no husband. Jesus therefore said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband, for thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In this thou saidst truly. The woman said unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. I guess the earlier statements of his weren't sufficient evidence. They just seemed like the ramblings of some guy who needed water very badly, which probably happens in the desert. So, she realizes, from the fact that he knows her entire marital and sexual history, that he probably is a holy man of some sort, that he is a prophet of some sort. And so she asks him the crucial question. Verse 20. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and which there's a great evidence for that. Jacob's well is right there. Anyway, and ye say, ye being the Jews, not necessarily Jesus, he hasn't talked about this at all, that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. And then comes the kicker. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet in Jerusalem worship the Father. This is a great prophecy that there's going to be a greater and more destructive captivity than the Babylonian. In not a long time, everything is going to get razed, and the Jews are going to get crushed, and the Samaritans are going to get crushed, and there's going to be all kinds of problems all across the board. Ye worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh when the true worshippers, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is the Spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. In other words, there's going to come a time where the place doesn't matter. There's going to come a time where the things, the external, physical principles of the law aren't going to matter as much, because you can't keep them the full way. Because the temple and the mountain are going to be lost to you. So you have to make sure that you've got the Spirit and the truth inside of you. The woman says, and all this great stuff, and then the disciples come back and marvel that he's talking to this woman of Samaria, because she's a woman first and she's a Samaritan. Yet no man said, What seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot that we have no indication she ever got Jesus water out of, and went her way to the city and said to them, Come unto me, for I have seen the Christ. Come see this man which told me all things which I ever did. Is this not the Christ? And in fact, a little earlier, Jesus identifies himself to this woman as the Christ. And as far as we know, across all the Gospels, this is the earliest he identifies himself as the Messiah, as the anointed, as the Christ, is to this woman of Samaria, which is kind of crazy because, woman Samaria. It seems like a lot of cool stuff happens to women, right? Remember this, that God does cool stuff to women, or with women, whichever. So, then he gets into, we've talked about living water, then he talks to his disciples about having meat of doing the will of the God and all these things. And the Samaritans come, and the Samaritans believe. And some of the Samaritans believe because the woman testifies of Christ. Others of the Samaritans believe because they come and they see Christ and they talk to him and they're converted. So a bunch of the Samaritans are converted. And Jesus never gets his drink of water. and he never gets the physical food. Well, he probably gets it eventually, but this contrasts nicely with the next pericope is when he's in Galilee and the Galileans receive him and they want to see all this stuff. But there's a nobleman from Capernaum, which is another city in the Decapolis, so it's near Galilee, but it's not like really close. And hears that Jesus has gone to Galilee. So he goes to Galilee and says that his son is really sick. Then Jesus said unto him, except ye see signs and wonders, you will not believe. He's a Naaman, maybe. This is the Gospel according to Jacob. He's a Naaman. He wants Jesus to come and do some miracle. Right? This woman at the well wants this living water. She doesn't realize that, like, he's not talking about like a spring. He's talking about the spiritual spring. At first, she doesn't realize it. And Jesus calls him out. He says, you are not going to believe unless you get signs and wonders. Then the nobleman says to him again, asks him again, Sir, please come before my son dies. He wants Jesus to come with him. Jesus, this is verse 50, said unto him, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And this is the important thing. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him and went his way. He starts out wanting the signs. But then the master gives him a command. And his desire for signs, and his desire for even just more of the Lord's presence, is swallowed up seemingly by his desire to do what's been asked of him. And I think it's a great contrast because the woman at the well never gives Jesus the water. They get into this long discussion about other things, doctrinal and sexual and whatever else, right? Okay, the sexual is just like tangential, but still. But because she has this discussion argument, she brings a bunch of people of Samaria to believe on Christ. Contrasting this nobleman, and this is the only time that this nobleman story appears. By the way, it's only in John. Well, like I said before, most of John's only in John. He himself he believes, and his whole house believes, because he had the faith to just obey. Without the extra discussion, without the extra talking, just he heard the word of the Lord and he obeyed. She heard the word of the Lord and she discussed it, she debated it. And the great thing is that both of these were okay. Both people had miracles. Both people got what they wanted. In the case of the Samaritan woman, she didn't know that there was something more out there for her. She didn't go to the well. She went to the well to get water. She wasn't expecting the living water. And she talked with the Lord and she questioned the Lord. And it worked out great. And this other guy didn't question the Lord. And he went his own way. And it went out great. And the great thing is that people are different. And lives are different. And circumstances are different. Context is different. So don't feel bad if your path isn't like everybody else's path. If you're the kind of person that needs to talk more with the Lord, maybe you've got a woman at the well. Maybe you're the kind of person who you're needing signs and wonders. And so maybe you just need to act on faith. I don't know. But you might, and God does. So if you need to know, ask him. It's neat. I'll talk about other stuff later. This is like a long video, especially considering I only talked about one chapter. So, things to remember. The place doesn't matter. The ordinances don't entirely matter, because you cannot be saved by the ordinances. You're saved by the atonement of the Spirit of the Lord. And if you don't have that, the ordinances don't matter. Even it says in Doctrine and Covenants, if you are baptized 100 times, it doesn't matter if you aren't changed by the Lord. So that's today's lesson. I love you. Bye.